to my blog and podcast. I'm very excited today because this is our second filming and I have a very special guest, someone I've known for a few years now. We've done some gigs together over the years. It's the very Reverend Tim Costello. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you. And can I say, when we do gigs, I only speak. If they had me singing, it'd drive everybody out. So it's lovely doing them with you.
It's probably good that I don't speak that much either. You can speak definitely better than me. Tim's here at the moment. We're all here actually with a live audience at World Vision Australia in Burwood in Melbourne. And Tim is currently the World Vision Australia's Chief Advocate, which is a very fancy name for pretty much doing what you've done in the past, but I got a bit more freedom maybe because you were CEO of World Vision, which probably kept you a bit more Australia-based for 13 years prior to taking on the Chief Advocate role. You have also started your career as a lawyer, and I want to hear the latter story. Don't let me forget that. If you remember that one, we've heard that as you've spoken previously. And then you were
This is just going to be the best of Tim Costello.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And you were the Mayor of St Kilda. Then you've got a whole pile of things here. After that, you became the Chief Executive of World Vision, and now you're the Chief Advocate. Chief is in your title a lot.
Yeah, so Chief Advocate is a lovely term because I feel my wiring and DNA has always been around advocacy. As a Christian, the biblical category for advocacy is the word prophecy or a prophet, but Chief Prophet didn't seem to ring such a good bell. Chief Advocate.
That's a lot of responsibility right there, right? Prophets.
They get stoned too, prophets.
Yes. Never welcome in their own town, yeah.
So Chief Advocate has been a very good space for me.
And you've travelled abroad for most of that 13 years, and prior to that you actually studied in Switzerland. You've probably been to most countries in the world. I've got 13 stamps in my passport and I'm pretty proud of that. Do you know how many you've got in yours?
No idea. Ask my PA, Robin. She might. But
she'll run home and count them
onto
your office.
But my wife and I went to Switzerland when we were both 24, had our first child in Switzerland, which has been a wonderful flashback because just last Monday we became grandparents for the first time.
Yay.
And
Monday the 4th of December.
And it really did hit me, the love and support of my son and his wife and all the families coming in. How in Switzerland, though we had student friends who came in and supported us, there was no grandparents, there was no friends, there was no community. And at 25, were we, when we had our first child, I look back and realise it was both overwhelming, even the birth was overwhelming. The Swiss-German doctor, whose English was pretty bad, but he kept wanting to instruct, he kept saying to my wife, pull. Oh. I said, do you mean push?
Oh, no.
Jawohl, push. It's the same word, isn't it?
Oh, no.
And by Swiss law, you had to register a boy's name and a girl's name before the birth. If you were Swiss, from a list of names they gave you.
Wow.
Is
this how the country runs so well?
It's why the trains run on time.
Right.
And we had listed only a boy's name because we'd had an ultrasound.
Right.
Well, my wife had. And it was a boy. We're told it's a boy. We trusted doctors. We had a headline from the papers. So Prince William had just been born and it's a boy, headlines, name in, just had to write the weight in, announce it. Out comes this baby. I hadn't been to any birthing classes. The doctor getting his English mixed up. My wife, exhausted, 30-hour labour, says, it's a boy, isn't it, Tim? I was a lawyer by training. I looked at this. I said, Doctor, what's this? Because I just trusted doctors. And then the pressure was on. You haven't got a girl's name. And I said, can I wait and talk to my wife? No.
This is not our baby. Put it back. It's supposed to be a boy.
She weighed 4 kilograms, 700. And the Swiss-German doctor was so surprised at the weight. He said,
that's huge.
He said, are all Australians this big? And I felt like saying, no, we throw these ones back, So the pressure was then on. The pressure was on, choose a name.
He's calling the police because what do they do with their babies in Australia?
And without consultation, my wife was getting treated, sewn up, and I had to choose a name, which took Claire Hannah, our first child, which took my wife a little time to accommodate herself to that name because there'd been no discussion. Now it was registered and it was out.
And what was the boy's name that you'd chosen?
The boy's name was Martin, which we subsequently had, and he's now a father. But you really do realise, out of your culture, everything is different. And without family, friends, grandparents, you do feel very alone. And just watching a birth last Monday of my first grandchild, it brought back a lot of memories of the differences.
Yes. And before we go on to talk about, did that lead you into these ongoing roles towards, advocating against poverty in the world? I've got to get a little brag in because last Saturday on the 8th of December, I watched and helped bring into the world our fourth granddaughter.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Round of applause.
Yes, Charlotte Grace. And I've never seen a birth. I mean, I've given birth twice, but I've never seen one. I was there with all my family and friends and really great staff here in Australia. And it's still a bit of a scary thing, isn't it, and pretty full on.
Well, I said to my mother, who's 89, and her first great-grandchild, she's stopping everyone in her nursing home screaming as they pass by, "I'm a great-grandmother."
Good on.
And I said, it would have been nice if your husband, my father, had lived to see his first great-grandchild. And she said, "No, not really." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Look, when you were born, Tim, he was teaching at Carey, a boys' school. Someone had to ring him to say he'd had a child, a boy. And his first words were, 'Oh, that's disappointing. I wanted a daughter.'" So he got me, then he got Peter. Finally he got a daughter, Janet, and boy, did he spoil her. But look, it's an exhilarating experience.
Yes. We have 2 daughters and 4 granddaughters. No boys in sight, except for the son-in-laws. Unfortunately, they're pretty good dudes, so very happy. So you've really have led a full-on life, because when you first came back into Australia from your study as the Rev, you became earlier on National President of the Baptist Union. You, as I said, the Mayor of St Kilda. You were the Baptist Minister at St Kilda Baptist and Collins Street Baptist in Melbourne. You didn't choose the easy outer suburbs, did you?
No, we came back to St Kilda, to a little Baptist church that only had 8 members, all over 80. So effectively it had died.
8 members?
8. And because they couldn't pay me a salary, though there were calls to bigger eastern suburban Baptist churches with manses and good salaries, we felt called to go to St Kilda. Because they couldn't pay me a salary, I opened a legal practice. So you used to walk into a church to go to see a lawyer and ask about your crime, your divorce, which was a bit different.
Was there a lot of repentance on the way there?
The legal practice grew and we took on more lawyers. The church grew and we ended up taking on another 3 ministers, and it growing. We ended up doing a range of programs, bought a halfway house for runaway kids. Back then, St Kilda was the catchment area for runaway kids. So you left home and hit St Kilda and the streets. It was the catchment area for mentally ill people. So as a church, we took on a big special accommodation house with 40 residents. So we got involved with the underside of St Kilda, and in the legal practice I was representing sex workers and lots of criminals, and that was an interesting fusion of church ministry and legal work.
Yes. And during those times, you would have seen poverty in a whole variety of definitions of poverty. I think a lot of us, when we hear the word poverty, we really think about starving children in Africa. But that is one part of what we define as poverty, but it's such a huge thing. What would be your definition after all these years of working starting there in St Kilda, right there on the streets of Australia, and we would think we didn't have a lot of poverty here in Australia. And since then, you've been to a lot of countries in the world and a lot of major disasters in the world. You've been right down there in grassroots.
Yeah.
Have you got? Can you put poverty into a definition for us, or is it just too big?
So poverty to most people is a lack of material resources. So where World Vision works, it's absolutely poor with a lack of material resources to give your kids enough calories to survive under 5, to give them an education, to give them clean water. In Australia, poverty can certainly be a lack of material resources, but different in this sense that we have, thankfully, a safety net. It's too low, but you're not going to starve in Australia. Poverty, I learned in St Kilda days, is relational. It's spiritual. It's emotional. The poor, whether here or overseas, often have an impoverished view of themselves. It's a view that I'm cursed, that I'm a loser, that I'm someone who others don't want to listen to. It may be because of a disability, a mental illness, but in countries overseas, in India, where I was earlier this year, the poor literally believe God has abandoned them. So in a lower caste, an untouchable caste, they are godless. Their self-image is that they have absolutely no worth. And that emotional, relational, spiritual poverty is equally significant as material poverty. So often our donors in World Vision think poverty and overcoming it's as simple as saying we're rich in Australia. They have a problem in third world developing countries called material poverty. We'll send some resources. They won't be so poor, so we've dealt with poverty. We know in World Vision, actually, it's not simply material transfer. That's not development. It's presence to remind those who feel abandoned by God, feeling they're absolutely worthless, that God knows their name, that they have dignity, that they, out of dignity, have skills, that they can be empowered. And we see in World Vision work, a lot of the poor are naturally entrepreneurial, given a chance. Poverty in Australia, a lot of our poor are suffering from mental illness, from domestic violence. And there is another set of policies and presence that's important there, because there is a safety net here, which where World Vision works, there isn't.
When David and I went to Lesotho on our one World Vision trip, we were actually really taken aback by the fact that material poverty and poverty of spirit don't always go hand in hand either. Sometimes we think that people who don't have much aren't happy people, but we found where we went that these were some of the happiest people that we'd ever met. And all they did need was a bit of a helping hand and an education program, as well as a gift of a couple of pigs or a couple of sheep or a chicken or two. And yes, they are very entrepreneurial. Is that an easier form of poverty to rise above?
Yeah, so in developing countries, there'll be people with mental illness. There will be people who have been also sexually abused. And we now know that you can see with a sexually abused young child literally black spots in the brain where they have shut down, and therefore their skills to earn is great. There will be, even in poor countries, people who are addicted, particularly the middle classes in some of the developing countries where drugs, alcohol, cause addiction. So there is overlaps between poverty in Australia, which is what I'm saying a problem with what's happened to you, and the developing world. But the other,
can often in towards material problems as well.
Yeah, the difference is that a lot harder, though not impossible in Australia, to do a a low income loan and get people who have been badly damaged running a business. So many, just given a chance in the developing world, will grab it.
Yes.
And they actually have skills.
Yes.
They just haven't had any
But
access and opportunity.
Yes. They've been doing it to survive.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's continuity and differences in the way poverty works. But look, I would say the poverty in Australia is actually profound loneliness. Mother Teresa called loneliness the leprosy of the West. Just now we're discovering studies that say loneliness in Australia, Western countries, is a bigger killer than smoking, a bigger killer than obesity. The developing world, by and large, has still community.
Yes.
And this audience would have heard me tell the story of living in a slum in New Delhi, being overwhelmed by the intensity, the poverty, the heat, watching a BBC documentary of slum dwellers in Delhi in first world city of London for 2 weeks. And they saw Big Ben and Westminster, aged care homes, council facilities, sporting facilities. They were then interviewed. From Delhi, a slum to here, what's your impressions? The first thing they said was,
we feel sorry.
We have to do something to help these poor people in London.
Yes. Yeah.
And why? They're so lonely. They're so depressed. They put their old people in aged care homes and they hardly visit them. This is so tragic.
Yeah.
This is appalling. This is something we can do something about.
Yes.
So we do get a sense that there is differences in the face of poverty. Materially, we've solved the problem of supply. How many widescreen digital TVs a family home needs?
Yes.
But that has come at a cost, where that sense of community fragmentation or relational wealth certainly intensifies poverty.
Now, we have great access to the world via the net and all the telecommunications and all the IT that we have these days. So there's a school of thought that we've been brandishing around in my group of friends, that people are now finding their community in different places of the world and they come together on the internet. Is it likely, because I'm not that kind of person, I need the one-on-one contact, I need to hug my kids, I need to hug my grandkids, I need to be with my friends. Do you think that is going to replace community, and is it going to be enough, or do we need, because the developing countries don't have that as much, if at all, and so they go, when their neighbour's sick, they go help them, whereas we might hear our neighbour's sick on Facebook 5 days later, and we're kind of too busy to go because then we have to do our Instagram chat.
Look, there's no doubt that people my age who are down on the next generation and social media often miss that there can be and is real communities that develop in social media and share. But social media can never replace touch, the expression of a face, the emotion that happens when you sit in a room and see the body language. And, I think even at World Vision we need a rule, only a certain number of emails to someone in the same building, otherwise go and talk to them.
Go and have a chat.
And what we know also is that the algorithms of social media mean you are now self-selecting people who are in the same bubble with the same prejudices and interests as you.
Yes.
Whereas communities that are made up of diverse groups had to build bridges and listen and go, wow, that's different to me and I'm feeling upset. Why? How can I overcome my feelings to understand where they're at?
Yes.
When you're in the bubble and stories are driven to you and your community's all in the bubble, in an echo chamber saying the same thing, I don't think you learn the empathy and the struggle and the differences. And I think the world re-tribalising is in part due to social media communities that might feel wonderful, but they're just actually expressing the same prejudices.
I think the more that you are with people, and like you say, you experience other people's journeys, if you're walking alongside them, you're obviously getting a very different perspective. You have to change your perspective to stay walking alongside some of your friends, don't you? But on social media, like you say, that's not happening in the same way. Do you think also that our media, I was looking at some studies just last week that were talking about the fact that, you know, we crave, particularly in the Western world, we crave that if it bleeds, it leads news. Give me some bad news and we're there. You know, we crowd around bad situations, and yet the good news side of it, we get bored, we turn it off and we wander away. What do you think it is that's in us as humanity, and is it more defined in developed worlds as opposed to developing, where you spend a lot of your time with these people? You know, do we get sucked in by that? And one of the studies was showing that the more we listen to negativity, the more we crave it. It's very addictive, because we in some way start believing it, and then we want that bad news to uphold our self-belief that we're not good.
Yeah.
Now, you were talking about mental illness and poverty in Australia with relational difficulties with people. Do you think our media is contributing that? I'm not just talking social media, I'm talking, you know, we just hit with the news all the time, aren't we? And bad stuff.
Look, there's no doubt that newspaper editors know that bad news, if it bleeds, it leads, actually sells more.
Yes.
There have been attempts at good news media outlets, and they've done okay, but they just don't compete. Well, newspapers can't compete with anything now, so we've lost mainstreaming and broadcasting. It's all narrowcasting. That's the real challenge of social media, where most of us get our information now. So that sense of having to bridge is being lost generally, and that's a real worry. I certainly think you're asking a question that's impossible to answer. What by instinct, by nature, are humans? Are we primarily good, or are we primarily bad, and we want bad to feel superior, to feel we're not as bad off as them? I believe we're made good. I believe that there is a fundamental fracture through us that actually says this sense of wanting to feel superior to someone else, and therefore is attracted to bad news happening to others. Sometimes when World Vision's talking about humanitarian bad news, it's a trigger for great generosity. It's not always that bad news is bad.
But it's great to be aware of things that are happening.
Yeah, if anything, the problem at the moment is compassion fatigue. You go, not my problem.
Okay.
I've got enough worries with the traffic getting to work and getting my kids from school afterwards. But that question of what are we essentially is one that, you know, I've struggled with in my World Vision work. I've seen the best in people in the worst circumstances where I would say I wouldn't be able to get up and go on. I'd be crushed. And I see extraordinary courage and generosity and community sacrifice for others. And I go, there you go, humans are good. I've seen in the same context, and it's true in Australia, malevolence, greed, lust for power, cruelty, a total lack of empathy also. So I'm always struggling with this set of weights, you know, are we good, are we bad? I'm almost tempted to say we're neither. We're both. And both run through us. And that's where your question about news media is quite critical, because if news media actually feeds that bad negative side, it nourishes something that is out of balance. That's actually a worry.
Because I'm a bit of an optimist, and Dave and I like to say, you know, there is more good always happening in the world than bad at any one time. And I believe that there is more good in us than bad at any one time. And yet, again, I realise that some of the critical moments of my life have been in very difficult times. That's when I've made the shift. And I've gone, okay, I need to not take this, take advantage of this. I need to be more appreciative of my loved ones. I need to be more grateful for all the great things I have in life. So is it that yin and yang? And you were talking about then about getting it out of balance. Do you think that there is something we can do consciously in humanity to shift it back towards the good? Because, or is it a generational thing? Because my mum always used to say, what's the world coming to, you know, when she was getting elderly? The world's just not like it used to be. And you know, I'm middle-aged now, and I think, is it harder for my children and my grandchildren to grow up than it was for me? I know it's different. Was it harder for me in the good old days, or?
Yeah, I think the edge is much closer for kids. The drugs are more accessible. The onset of depression is quite staggering. 2 million Australians suffer from depression. If 2 million Australians suffered from leprosy, we would have a massive budget allocation.
Or 2 million dying on the roads. Look at the big budget we have, you know, with the TAC, and rightly so.
Yeah, I think, though, for kids, you know, I can think of No Stranger Danger and out all day on my bike as a kid and at the park. I do think we are more aware of threats and we are more protective. I think that's got some downsides for our kids, actually. I think that's... And kids not allowed to be kids. I mean, when you've got 8-year-old boys, prepubescent, who are getting access to pornography and are acting out in sexual ways when they don't even have the hormones to know what they're doing, the edge is much closer for our kids. So I think at one level, parents have reason to worry. Certainly their lack of ability to have control over what their kids are seeing on smartphones.
Yes.
You know, my son, who's just had a baby in England, where he taught, they took kids' smartphones at the school gates each day. And they said, you'll get them back afterwards, and your parents' duty to actually see what you're on. We don't do that. Kids are on their smartphones. So there's a whole world out there that parents find that they feel powerless in.
And then there's the expectation of the teachers to be fulfilling some parenting roles now, because the parents are out working to pay for our big houses.
I feel so sorry for teachers. What politicians have worked out is that the one funnel that they have for shaping kids is called the school, because every kid has to go to a school. So they've downloaded onto teachers sex education, depression prevention, alcohol and drug prevention, a whole lot of things that communities, churches, others, actually teachers have been downloaded with huge responsibilities. And again, listening to my son, who's a teacher, parents, particularly at fee-paying schools, are outraged if their little Johnny or Betty isn't top of the class, because every parent's child is gifted. So it must be the teacher who missed it. And the rage and the expectation and so there is a brittleness. There is a brittleness in the culture that does really worry me.
And what's that saying to our children? If our parents are saying, if we're saying this as parents to our children, you know, you're the best all the time, it doesn't really prepare them for the real world.
I
does
think
that contribute to loneliness further down the track?
Totally. Look, if you want a very big philosophical answer from me, which I'm sure you don't.
I don't know, I'm edging towards it.
I think liberalism, which really is the focus on the individual, has been great for giving us rights and a sense of our free speech and all of those things. What liberalism of left and right has done, focusing on the individual, has actually created a brittleness. So, of left liberals, they have asked good questions. What's the purpose of the market? What's it fit for? What's its social usefulness? But they have been weak, saying, we'll overturn previous taboos and moral attitudes, and the individual is free to do whatever they like. The individualists on the right, have said, you know, we treat people as consumers. They plug their individual preferences into this thing called the market. They get what they want. So the meaning of life is to shop. The meaning of life is to consume. I think this individualism has created a brittleness in our whole culture and a narcissism, which is about my entitlement. Out of my faith, I believe we are made for community. I believe that's what the Christian understanding of a community God is, that we are profoundly interdependent. It is not all about me. It's not all about my individual rights.
Darn it.
And I think kids growing up in a narcissistic culture where parents expect them to actually be the best. The number of times I hear parents say, my child is special. Well, of course your child is special to you. It's your child. But this step that my child is really special and someone isn't offering them the respect or the teachers aren't recognising it. This is a narcissistic take, and we do see it played out at political level with a few narcissistic leaders right at the moment. It does worry me.
Let's get onto, you have been part of the first response team, or at least second response team in many tragic disasters in the world, natural disasters in particular. What are the first things that hit you when you get off that plane? You know that there's been a tsunami, you know that it's tragic, you know that you're going into an area where people's lives have been just completely pulled off the wall. Going in prepared, but then getting off that plane, what's the first things that have hit you, and how have you dealt with that? Does it get easier each time you're faced with this kind of situation, or does it get harder? How do you cope?
You know, it never gets easier. The first thing that hits you is just the chaos. So we are structured to need order to function.
Yes.
And whether it's an earthquake or a volcano or a tsunami, whatever it is, just the disorder makes it really difficult to function. You are having then to work on your wits, how you actually get around, because the rules have all been dislocated.
And there's also studies that show that when we are putting our energy into that flight or fright response or freeze, you know how we have that towards crisis, that our energy is then going towards that and goes to all our bodily functions and actually takes it away from our brain. So they're saying we actually get a bit less smart when we're in crisis.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's harder to deal with all these things
to
anyway.
Process.
Yeah,
absolutely. The second thing is often the silence, and the silence is a reflection of trauma. Yeah. So if you go to most developing countries, you know, the market, the chatter, the community,
hustle and bustle.
It's like the spirit has been sucked out of people. And that utter bewilderment, traumatic shock, did this really happen? Where's my loved one? Does anyone care? Is there going to be help? Just is manifest often in a silence.
Because it's everybody in those situations, isn't it?
You know, disasters are undiscriminating, and they hit the rich as well as the poor. Then it is that remarkable thing of the human spirit where you see real leadership from very ordinary people who've decided they're going to break the silence, they're going to actually act, they're going to start collecting things. It's not done very systematically, but they're going to respond. And you start to see against the tidal wave of destruction and disaster a new wave of human hope, of resistance, of activity, of we're not going to just accept this. The suffering is always something you fear. You know, my first disaster was the Darfur in Sudan, and just the suffering of women, all of whom had been raped, or their mothers raped, or their sisters raped, just overwhelmed me. The tsunami, it was the mass graves of kids and women. Men could run faster, hold onto a tree. It was women and children.
Wow, never even thought about that.
Largely.
Wow.
You never get used to the smell. Nothing prepares you for the smell in hot climates of corpses and mass graves. This is human suffering that you can train for, but you can never be trained for.
And you willingly go in there time after time and time and World Vision people willingly go in there, and so many people do. 2 questions. The big one, why? And does it relate to, you were talking about that tidal wave of people coming in and acting and getting on with it. Is that the innate goodness in humanity?
Yeah, so World Vision is sending staff into these places when DFAT is ordering every Australian out. And it takes a particular sort of courage and mettle, and I take my hat off to World Vision staff and our relief teams to do it. You know, not everyone can do it. It's a certain wiring to be up for it and go, yep, I'm getting on that plane.
Yeah.
And I'll be there. So,
because I guess
not just World Vision, other agencies too.
Yes, people who put themselves willingly in that position. Yep. I guess it's thank goodness. It's like someone who works in the emergency department in a hospital. I could not do that, right? I really don't think I could handle that. There are other situations I can handle that they might not be able to, perhaps. But, isn't it wonderful that we are diverse and that there are people to go into those situations? But you obviously, if you're in those really traumatic places all the time, coming out of that, there must be a lot of support that's needed for you to be able to get back on that plane the next time.
Yeah, and there's good debriefing that World Vision does and other agencies do. But to be honest, you never, ever lose the sound, sight, smells that you've seen. No debriefing can extinguish that. And, I will be giving speeches unrelated to World Vision, sometimes on happy occasions, and there'll be an image, and out of nowhere, I'll find myself in tears.
Yes.
And you realise you do build fences around your experience. You can't expect Australians to understand. They'll ask a question of what it was like. Their eyes will glaze over. They'll go, who's playing in the cricket tomorrow?
Yes.
They've moved on. They weren't there. No point getting angry. But no amount of debriefing actually can just extinguish all that.
And so do you get to the point of just, yes, you accept that everyone can't experience that and are not going to and therefore can't understand? Does it make you angry at times? Do you want to... Because when Dave and I went through the Black Saturday fires in Kinglake, our town was pretty much wiped out. And we stayed on the mountain and it was like a bomb hit it, and it was brought to my mind, this must be what it's like to live under military rule, kind of in a disaster area. We had a lot of restrictions on us where we could go. And then about 2 weeks after that, and I felt like we'd been struggling to get into our community and to help the people. A lot of people died. I was helping animals, nothing like a tsunami, but still quite a distressing
terrifying
situation.
Yep.
And David and I were there on the day, so we fought the fire and we lived in our own little world. And yet 2 weeks later, I just went 30 minutes down the road to a shopping centre, my first time off the mountain. And people are getting their nails done and their hair coloured and arguing about how much a milkshake cost. And I just wanted to go, people, I'm surviving here. And I was really angry for just a short time. And then I realised that while I was in that place, people in Queensland were suffering from floods, to say the least, and a million other things were going on around the world that I have no connection with at all.
Yeah.
So...
Look, at one level, as humans, we have to compartmentalise just to keep going because there is too much being thrown at us. At another level, when the anger, which is a natural response, stays, that's when you're getting near burnout, because that's inside you and that's going to be corrosive for you. And we have lots of stories of burnout. Just because of the nature of the work.
Yes.
So there is a sense where you have to be able to go, let this go. They don't understand, but like you, I'll come back maybe from a disaster. I'll hear Australians have been holidaying in Thailand on the plane, whinging about something in Australia. I want to shake them.
Yes.
I want to say, have you got any idea how blessed we are? How dare you whinge? And it's a moment of going... I'm getting angry. You need to let this go. I came back from a disaster with Trihadi, a volcano up in Sumatra. We hadn't slept for 48, maybe many longer hours. flew into Bali. We're flying economy, but at the front of the train, there's a big, front of the plane, there's a big crowd at Bali Denpasar Airport. And we walk out first, and this Australian, as happens to me a lot, recognises me, and he goes, "Tim Costello, you're at the front of the plane. That's why I don't give to World Vision. My money doesn't get there." He starts abusing me.
I thought he was going to go, "Good on you, you're here, yay."
And Tree, who's Indonesian, goes, "What? Do all Australians know you?" And I just said, "No, I was flying economy. Well, you people are all the same." So you sort of get insult laid on insult at times, and you're right to feel angry and defend yourself, but at another level you have to say, if you keep that anger going, that's what burnout territory is.
Right.
You have to let that go.
I think that's a really good analogy for life in general, whether we're going into disaster areas or not. If we're constantly angry, we're burning out and we need to sit back. I want to quote your book. We've got a couple of your books here, Faith and Hope, and we need one called Love now. I know you have one with love in the title, but we need the trio. Are you working on that?
Well, I was. Then my wife said to me, "Not sure you know enough about love." It rather stopped me in my tracks.
I want to quote from your book. Now, this is a Martin Luther King quote, but I love it. As you know, I have two of your books that you've given me over the years, because I gave one away and then I found it again, but by that time you've given me another, so I've given that away again. I love your book, because particularly Hope book, because I'm about hope, and I know that you're about hope, and I know that that's why you and the people like you and people in World Vision are doing this job of going into these hard places and, getting abused and misunderstood for how you raise money to be able to do all these things. Martin Luther King says, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but bends slowly towards justice."
Yeah.
How do you see these things?
No, I believe that totally. Even with the setbacks we're seeing with populist authoritarian leaders today, we must remember that there was a civil rights movement, and that non-violent resistance has made the life of blacks much better in America, though there still is a Black Lives That Matter campaign. That
Yes.
The attitude toward women, with a whole lot of attitudes that we had, and though we need a Me Too movement, actually is much better than where it was. Not to ever mention slaves or gay people or a whole range of things there. But the arc isn't just linear, always moving in that direction toward justice. There are steps back.
Yes.
And the interesting thing about Martin Luther King with that quote was he wasn't saying it just happens either automatically. He had to go to prison and his house firebombed, and he had to engage. In other words, good doesn't happen just because there's an arc moving that way toward justice. It requires commitment. It really raises the question for all of us, why is it so hard to do good? And why is it so easy for evil to prosper?
Yes.
So it's a great quote, and I think it is true, but we can't be passive.
No, we've got to keep acting. What role, and particularly when we're talking about the poverty, relational poverty and loneliness and depression that we have a lot here in Australia, that kind of poverty more, what role do you think greed and shame has in the perpetuation of that type of poverty?
Yeah, no, greed and shame are very powerful human forces. So tomorrow I'm going to Perth, I'm going tonight to address all the directors of Australian cricket. CEO of Cricket Australia's called me in, and as we know...
And you love cricket.
I do, and I'm a bit more worried about our top batting order than ethics at cricket at the moment after the loss in Adelaide. Anyway, the interesting thing was, for a while there, Cricket Australia thought the message from the Australians was win at any cost. We have to have wins. And then with the sandpaper episode, the outrage that we were cheating, and the message got through, it's not whatever it takes to win. you have to win honourably, because cricket actually is about honour and the values and who we are, and that is completely unacceptable.
I even know about that, and I don't follow sport at all, but the sandpaper issue, that was a biggie.
So the nation felt terrible shame with the sandpaper incident. It was like we as a nation have been humiliated. It's interesting, I was in India when it happened, and a whole lot of Indians who love cricket said, "What's the matter? We do it all the time." But we felt ashamed. We felt really ashamed.
So you're not advocating it though, are you?
No, but when you forget that honour and shame are very important to our makeup, so win at any cost, whatever it takes, we then have moments of going, actually. And shame is very different to guilt. This is where we got stuck with the apology that John Howard refused to give to the Indigenous, and Kevin Rudd did. It was John Howard saying, well, this generation shouldn't feel any guilt. We didn't take the land, and we've built a prosperous nation. He's right. We aren't guilty, this generation. We didn't do the frontier massacres. But we still aren't, though we're not guilty, we still can feel ashamed. It was our ancestors. We are the descendants of them. Yes. And we now know those things actually were terrible.
And as humankind, that's tapped into part of us that we could easily do too, right?
Yeah. So shame is a very powerful emotion. I argue in one of my books that humiliation, I think, is the most powerful emotion. I've moved to Frankston. We live on the beach. I bought on Gumtree a $200 surf ski, and I've never been really into this. And I'm out on this surf ski. I'd borrowed a friend's and I could do it easily. It's not hard to surf ski paddling, so I bought one. It's much smaller, or I'm much bigger. Yesterday, I just kept falling off the surf ski, and I noticed all these people on Frankston Beach laughing at me. And I can't tell you the profound sense of humiliation I felt.
Right.
So humiliated, I gave up trying.
Aww.
I thought I'm going to wait till it's dark or nobody's on the beach. And I'll sneak out then. Humiliation, I think, for humans is actually very deep. On death row in America, a psychiatrist who works with those prisoners says every single one of the terrible murders were out of a sense of humiliation. To feel humiliated, I think, is very enraging. We could put this in terms of history and nations feeling humiliated. Trump says about his wall and why we have to have it. The world's laughing at us because people are coming into America. We're being laughed at. We're feeling humiliated. So I think shame and humiliation is very, very deep. It's why dealing with poverty isn't just material.
Yes.
It's why it goes to dignity. Yes. That you don't feel humiliated, that you actually are listened to, respected. This is profoundly important. So, yeah, I do think a lot of the bad things in life come out of that.
And we can use it very much as a weapon, can't we? The power, people in power can use it over the powerless to shame them and to keep them down. Even going through, again, the fires here, a small thing really in world terms, but very large in our area. 3 months down the track, I was negotiating with a telephone company. And, we were 3 months down the track. People were still just coming back and living in caravans. So many families had lost all their loved ones and lost everything they owned. I rang this particular telephone company to say, you've overcharged me $700 on my bill. And prior to that, they'd said that all of us living in that area, because all our power lines were down, we weren't going to have to pay for our phones until they could get the phone lines up again. We could have free mobile phone calls or at regular rates. Anyway, I rang the company 3 months down the track. Prior to that, every time I'd rung about something else, we had a committee had been set up, a division had been set up specifically for the Black Saturday fires to help with these things. 3 months down the track, I ring up and I said, oh, look, I've been overcharged. I'd like to talk to somebody in this division. And they said, oh, no, that's gone. We've moved on. And I was furious and had similar issues with insurance companies. And I said, look, here I am, a smart, capable woman, feeling humiliated by you, what about the little old lady down the road?
Yeah.
And the person who is perhaps socially deficient in some way, not able to communicate, or someone who has no idea what they've got to do next because they're just completely overwhelmed. This is what advocacy is about for the poor, isn't it?
No, advocacy isn't just a loud voice. And advocacy is coming alongside and empowering people that their voice matters, that they have rights, that they can actually stand up to that power and humiliation. It's empowerment.
In today's society, we are constantly being told that we can have anything, be anything we want. We were talking a little bit before about the narcissistic society that we live in. And yet so many of us in this world are living under the spirit of unworthiness and lack. And you see that all the time in your pastoring role, in your World Vision role. I'm sure you saw it in the mayoral role, St Kilda. It's everywhere. It's going to continue to be everywhere. But I want to ask the question again, or in a different way, how can we, as individuals, how can we do something that's going to have a lasting impact? Do we have to feel powerless, and do we have to feel shame that we can't do anything, or can we actively contribute to making the world a better place?
Absolutely. I have a friend who started a campaign called Random Acts of Compassion after Peter Dutton, our immigration minister, said, one random act of compassion toward refugees can undo all the work of stopping the boats. So it is this notion that we aren't even allowed to be compassionate and be who we are. This woman runs a Pentecostal church, started a campaign calling on Australians to do random acts of compassion. Right. I think empathy is what distinguishes us from animals. The imagination to go, what if that was me? What would that feel like? I will stand with them. So it's never on behalf of others, though sometimes it is. It's always with others. That sense that with them actually gives them the respect and the dignity to go on.
And that can be in very small ways, can't it? In our local communities, we can't all go and do these big things in places that are in tragedy, but we can go to our neighbour or down to help at the school, or we know somebody's having a hard time in our church or our tennis club, walking alongside.
These acts of compassion are learnt locally. Now, people say to me, yes, forget overseas aid and what you're doing, charity begins at home. And I go, yeah, it does begin at home. You learn to be empathetic at home in these acts. But charity doesn't end at home.
No, and particularly if your home's been wiped out.
Yeah, exactly. Charity actually is that other humans too, particularly those in absolute poverty, I can give. I can actually show solidarity with them. So I think living that way is a lifestyle, and all of us can do it.
We're getting close towards our hour. I'm going to have a little bit of fun with you, because when I've sat in green rooms with you, the phone rings and you go, hello, Hugh, how's Debbie today? Deborah, Hugh Jackson's on the phone to you. You've talked to not Nelson Mandela. Did you talk to Nelson Mandela? No. Barack Obama was what I was going to say. You've met with the Queen? No. Not the Queen.
I'm a Republican.
Not allowed past the corgis?
No.
I know that you do a lot of work with Bono, U2's Bono, and all these important people that we see as important in the world. And I'm just going to have a bit of fun with the whole 2 degrees of separation, because I think it's absolutely wonderful. My music idol is Amy Grant. And I know that you know Amy Grant. And so now when I touch you, I am 2 degrees of separation away from the person who is the reason I got into music. And I know you have a little Amy Grant story.
Yeah, I didn't know you knew this. I must have told you this.
Oh, yes, in a green room somewhere.
I was with my wife studying in Switzerland. He was an American musician I liked, Barry Maguire, Eve of Destruction.
We know Barry Maguire too.
So he was doing a concert, and we went to a Barry Maguire concert, and there was this 19, 20-year-old nervous young American, the support act, who broke down with her guitar in the support act and giggled. And right. Barry came on, she came and sat next to us. We took her out for pizza. We said, you're okay, don't be bad on yourself, I came back 3 years later and everyone was talking about Amy Grant. I said, Amy Grant. That's the girl I had pizza with. She was hopeless.
Now she has her star on Hollywood Boulevard and I've got a picture with it.
There you go.
Fantastic. Well, just before we finish off, and I want to thank you so much for your honesty, we're going to put up on the screen in post where people can buy your books, because there is so much wealth. Being a storyteller myself, I love to read other people's stories, and I really think that we can learn. And you've got some great anecdotal but true stuff there, right? That it's got some deep truths in about humanity in your anecdotal stories of things that you've experienced over the years. And so we'll put that up on the screen. And I want to say thank you to the World Vision team who have come. They've come and gone a bit because it's lunchtime for them, but we thank you for coming and being part of the audience today. And before we finish off, you're allowed to ask me one question. Oh, you've thought about it, haven't you?
No, I haven't
good.
Actually.
Good.
But, did you?
I'm getting worried.
Did you always see your future artistic calling as music?
Oh, no. When I was 14, I was asked by my biology teacher, don't know why, biology teacher, but we must have been talking about progression of life, to draw a picture of what my life was going to be like in 10 and 15 years, a common thing that we do. I had a little house, 2-story house, little windows, white fence, 6 children, happily married, home mum, the dog and the cat. And I remember that off and on throughout my life, because by the time I was 30, I had 2 children, I was divorced. My parents couldn't handle that. I got kicked out of my family for a little while. I've been in the 2 worst national disasters in Australia, Ash Wednesday in 1983 and Black Saturday in 2009. I've had health issues, currently living with blood cancer. My life didn't turn out to be that. But somewhere along that path, I found that I was looking for something, and I found music. And I found, for me, everything creative, not just music, but creative writing and creative expression was the thing that connected me with the rest of the world. Because when you go through those personal things, you can easily shut yourself off. And I could have done that. But I find that music takes us to so many places and gets us to meet so many amazing people, and we hear stories. Sometimes we're in the outback in a closed Aboriginal community. We went to Africa. Sometimes we sang in the Opera House last year. You know, we get to do this big diversity of life, and never thought that would be me.
I should have been interviewing you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ordinary Angels. You're an ordinary angel. Tim Costello. Thank you.